Okay, welcome everyone to the Shadow Side of the Feminine Summit. I am one of your hosts, Blair Lindsay, and today I'm really thrilled and honored to bring you this guest. Sheila Cowburn is from South Africa. She's based out of South Africa. She is a clinical psychologist and Jungian analyst who approaches the feminine from her own intrapsychic framework, her own journey of dancing with the feminine. So Sheila, I'm really quite honored to speak with you today about the feminine and the shadow. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me to our dialogue.
Absolutely. So Sheila, let's just dive right in. I feel that you will be so helpful in bringing a framework to what we're talking about when we use this language of the feminine and the shadow, because there are so many ideas and concepts and connotations. So from the Jungian perspective, from your perspective, journeying with the feminine, what is the feminine to you?
Well, the feminine, as I see it, is what I would call a way of being, in the sense that it's a sort of set of energies, how we perceive our way of being in the world in the feminine. So when I talk about the feminine, what I really mean is a way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And by that one, I would use words like, receptive, maternal, acceptance, beingness rather than doingness, cooperation, relatedness, that's eros rather than logos. And bringing things together, a sort of more lunar consciousness, which is the moon, which is more feminine than the sun consciousness, which is masculine. Mm-hmm. So that's how I understand the feminine in terms of a way of being in the world. Mm-hmm. And because Jungian psychology describes opposites as bedfellows, then one is looking at the feminine way of being or energies as different to the masculine energies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this way of being is not gender specific.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No. That's the other point I wanted to make, that is, we're not talking gender here, because in Jungian terms, Jung posited that there is masculine and feminine energies in both the man and the woman. Mm-hmm. The question of wholeness or working towards one's individuation path is to find the balance between these two energies, both in a man and in a woman. So, they exist in both men and women, so it's not gender specific.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is an important point to bring up, because those two things are often conflated, that we're talking about men and women, when in fact it's something much different than being a man or a woman. As you said, it's this process of wholeness.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you saying, I love this phrase, that the masculine, these pairs of opposites are bedfellows.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And why is that important? Because just to give you what comes up for me in my mind is just recently hearing that this differentiation between the masculine, the feminine, the yin, the yang, that's not important. We're in this postmodern world where that's not so important. Let's go beyond the terms. But why is it important that we look at the masculine and the feminine as bedfellows?
Because if we're not going to see them as bedfellows, we're going to get into the same one-sidedness that we've had in patriarchy, if we're not careful. Because you see, we can say, well, we've got to move on. We're no longer in the patriarchal paradigm, and women have to find themselves and men have to. But the point is that if we're not careful, we're going to recreate the problem again with the one-sidedness that then doesn't do. I think the paradigm we're shifting to is no longer to be a one-sidedness, and I think that's why there's such a huge upheaval, is that it's a totally new unknown way where we're trying to have a both and a more of a mutuality and more of a reciprocity than matriarchy, which was the one-sidedness of the feminine, which moved to patriarchy, which was the one-sidedness of the masculine.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting times we're in, but that's why I'm kind of always working with the opposites, because I really believe that's where we're trying to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that offers an important perspective, because as you said, there's this danger of one-sidedness or everything bleeding together. And I think it's actually quite important to be looking at and distinguishing these different qualities so that we know where we're going. We know where we're coming from. We know where we're going. We have a better understanding of what we want and what we don't want.
Yeah, and you see, I think what's also for me very important is because patriarchy is based in power over. The feminist movement, you could say, was a desperate attempt, to try and overthrow the power, reality. The difficulty is that one can try and do that by using the same power over. And the point is that the feminine is not based in power, it's based in eros. My sense has been that while the feminist movement, and what that means, lots of qualifying, but the feminist movement was utterly essential to get through some barriers. I think we're in a stage now of having to be really careful. What do we mean by feminine power? Do we mean power over? Are we going to try and become worse patriarchs than men are? Because it's not just in women and in men. Women can be the worst patriarchs. If they get into their negative masculine side, they can be castrating and, really get into power. So for me, a lot of my work when I'm working with individual people and myself is looking at the power, kind of where does the power locate itself and what is it in service to, masculine or feminine, or can we find a middle ground? And I think that's an incredible journey and not easy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and what you just said, I think we're entering into starting a conversation around the shadow as well. So what is the shadow for you?
Well, the shadow for me is, of course, the repressed parts that are, if we look at the history of the feminine, for instance, I mean, one of the aspects that I often start with is that anything that is repressed and split off, which of course in many instances of the feminine has happened through patriarchy, it will turn dark. By nature, something that gets repressed and split off gets acted out in a negative way, unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I suppose that's the other thing I need to say, that my paradigm takes both the conscious reality and the unconscious reality into account. So we're looking at what is unconscious is what's usually repressed. And if it's not brought to consciousness, it's going to turn dark and become shadow.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the aspects of sexuality, of the feminine that has been pushed into the shadow is sexuality, for instance, one aspect of it. It's always been seen to be the basic, spirituality is what you go for, and the sexuality is instinctual, it's going to lead you astray, it's going to run amok. So women have carried the projection of sexuality as demonizing, threatening, they're the seductresses, and the fear of the feminine in the masculine psyche is projected out. They don't see it as that. So my kind of sense of part of the shadow of the feminine is repressed sexuality, where sexuality is for the man, it's the male gaze, it's not the woman's own precious part that is her own to offer, not wandered off. And of course we can see a whole lot around rape and all the kind of pedophilia and the dreadful things that go on as the acting out of the shadow side of sexuality. That's one aspect of shadow for me.
And a really important one, a lot to unpack in sexuality. What else do you see as this intersection of the feminine and the shadow? What else aren't we seeing or remains unconscious?
What also remains unconscious, I think, is the repressed. When we talk about the feminine, we're also looking at the fact that historically women have not, because it hasn't been valued and encouraged, most of the mothering that's come from our generation, the previous generation, has lacked the feminine ground. It's always been located in we're less than. So part of the shadow also is in women particularly, and I can talk about men also, but in women is a really deep sense of badness, feeling bad and guilty for so many aspects of ourselves. And that's also shadow. So it's very difficult. Women get stuck intrapsychically in places where they don't feel good enough about themselves. They have no ground underneath them to start to speak forth. So they remain quite undeveloped or in adolescent stages of femininity, because there's been no kind of encourager from the mother in the true sense of the feminine, because the mothers have also been brought up in patriarchy. So, my sense of the feminine in patriarchy also is that the mother has been the sacred cow. So, as an aspect of the feminine, but the mother isn't the only aspect of the feminine. So, wife and mother have been valued in patriarchy. If a woman leaves that, how does she know who she is as a woman? That is a very, very difficult journey for women today, because the maternal has been valued much more than anything else. So women trying to find their own feminine woman self. Incredible journey to find your own voice. I mean, I'm interested. You say you're a feminine empowerment coach, and I'm interested in. I'm sure that's part of what you're trying to do, is to help women find their voice. That's that sense of self is in the shadow still very often, or seen as not good enough or not worthy.
Oh, as you say that, I feel that so deeply. I feel that so deeply that, like, in my own body, it lands this idea that we haven't been encouraged because of the mother wound, because of the inability of our mothers in patriarchy to see their own qualities, which are separate than the qualities that patriarchy values, or beyond that, or different from. Our mother's inability to value those things also lead to her children not seeing themselves, not valuing themselves, not having a voice, or feeling, maybe adopting a voice that is what is seen out there, but not authentic to what's truly alive inside of her.
Very much so. And I think that's what makes the journey such a courageous one. It's a real heroine's journey, because it has to be done oneself, or by oneself, with sometimes the help of a therapist or analyst or a coach or somebody. But I really say, that for women to find their feminine soul self is an incredibly courageous journey.
Can you expand on that? Why is it courageous?
Because you see, I think we're so dominated in such unconscious ways around the adaptations that women have had to make to please the male. That's been her, whole socialization, should we say. And it's been so subtle and so embedded for so long that I think women, immediate sort of sense has been to please their man. So if you want to keep your man, you give the man, for instance, what he needs sexually. But it's again, to please the man. So if you go and want to keep your man, you better satisfy him sexually. If you want to keep your man, you better just be the good wife in the home and make sure that behind every, significant man is a good, nurturing woman. Mm-hmm. Now, when those values that are instilled from very little, those values are the message is there's an emptiness inside, because it's all about pleasing and adapting and giving the male world what they want. Yeah. And the male world values the maternal and the wife, and you give him children and you do those things. So the subtlety of the way in which that has shaped us, it's only when you start really working on a deep level with the unconscious that women are, sob in my consulting room when they realize how hard it is to find your voice, because it means not pleasing, it means being abandoned, it means all kinds of things. You don't fit in with the collective, because the collective is still very powerful in terms of mother and wife. Mm-hmm. It's in that sense that I say it's courageous, because it can mean, having to leave all alone and be alone. It may be more difficult for older women. I think younger women are empowered in new ways that are, for me, very exciting. So it may not be, but if you're working with women who've been kind of pretty much entrenched in the patriarchal paradigm, it's an incredibly difficult journey, but a very exciting.
I couldn't agree more. Extremely exciting and empowering, and does require a lot of courage and fortitude, and not necessarily in the sense that we think of fortitude or strength, but one has to be very strong to, and have the right support as well to journey into that shadow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so many things that I want to focus on. I'd love to go back to this idea of what you said in terms of reclaiming power, the feminine reclaiming power, and how feminine power is eros. And when we just switch over into power as we know it in patriarchy, we become the worst patriarchs.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that, and how does that happen?
You see, if we do our principle, it is heart. It's not head. Mm-hmm. Our entire culture has valued the intellectual, the dualism that goes back to Descartes was the deep split between spirit and matter. So when we're talking about eros, and we're saying that is where we find our power, many women, they found their power through their intellectual strivings, because it's been believed that that's how Western culture has suggested power. Often what has happened is our instinctual selves have gradually shut down. So our eros connection to ourselves is often lacking without us even realizing it. So to get to eros and to open the heart, as opposed to the head, is to reach into deep vulnerabilities. And I think it's that, how does one value one's vulnerability? Because in our patriarchal culture, that's also been something that has been humiliation for most.
Oh, Sheila, you just cut out a bit. Can you repeat that?
I'm saying that, Eros is about heart and vulnerability, and if we open heart, we experience our vulnerability, and our Western culture has made vulnerability a shameful and humiliating aspect. So it's the difficulty also then of being able to say, well, if I open myself to my vulnerability, I have to find a strength in that. And that is the Eros power that we're going to find. Now, it doesn't feel like power. It feels like shame and humiliation in our paradigm presently. And I think that's the part that makes this difficult, because it's not power from, oh, power over and I'll show you. It's more opening your heart and saying, this is where I can love and relate. But I open myself to being treated badly, to being, abused. And so it takes a real time and building up of a sense of self and ego enough to say, I stand by this, but that is not going to leave me in a position where I'm just going to be swaying in the wind and like a reed. I stand by my feeling side, and that's where my strength is, and that's the feminine.
Wow.
Not by the head and the principles that I want to, the concepts that I want to bring. And that's a very different power.
Wow. And what you're saying about this strength in vulnerability, I think a lot of women right now, to open in vulnerability is a very scary, very terrifying. Why would I do that in a world that already isn't safe for me, where I'm not valued? So I'm just going to put on more armor. So it's this real conundrum for women, where what you're saying, go ahead.
I was just thinking, I think this is where women need to support each other, and I think there are lots of kind of ways in which women's groups can do this, because you need support and encouragement. We need to encourage each other as to, to just hang in there and try and do it, and feel that we're supported by the woman clan in some sort of way, because we're all trying. We don't have a path. We're pathfinders now.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're interviewing me, but I mean, you're also in the field. So I would also be interested to see if what I'm saying is dovetailing with aspects of how you're working with people as well. I mean, are you finding challenging?
Yeah, Sheila, what you're saying I find so exciting and affirming.
Oh, good.
Very exciting and affirming. What you're saying very, very much relates to what my work in the world is. Insofar as the summit, we're talking to so many different people with different ideas about the feminine and the shadow. So it's been very interesting to see different aspects, and aspects that I resonate more with and aspects that I resonate less with, and sit with all of that, right? I think it's, as we were saying before we started recording, it's just an important conversation to be having. We're living in a very interesting time on Earth, and we're grappling with a lot of big things, and whatever we can do to have a conversation around what do we do? How do we navigate this?
Yeah. I think the whole sense of, the conquering. Our present paradigm is all about conquering nature. It's always about power over and how to overcome. So, I mean, that's also interesting for me in terms of, the whole question of sport and running and marathons and all these things that women are doing now, well, I mean, both men and women. But the point, it's often spoken about in the name of health and embodiment. And I think that the struggle often for me is I look at, what the feminine begins to look like, and it's about strong muscles and strong bodies. And I kind of, part of me wants to weep inside at the same time as seeing it as healthy. But the kind of age one, what's healthy and what becomes yet again something that is copying the masculine and trying to build muscle and be what is not the feminine, and it cuts the woman off more and more from her body, in fact. Body experience. And I mean, I think it doesn't, it's not that it needs, it is that necessary, but it can be. And I know for a lot of people I work with, it is that disembodied experience. It's the way of getting away from.
Yeah, as though their search for power is as you said, a conquest.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I think the inner attitude is so important.
Yeah.
If you're running and it's liberating and it's invigorating and you feel powerful and you feel embodied, that's one thing. And if you're running and you're telling yourself that you hate yourself and you're fat and I have to run because I ate that cheeseburger last night, then it's so subtle. It's such a subtle distinction between something that is aligned with self-betterment and health and support of the feminine and what's not. It's so subtle.
Very subtle. And also a very interesting and exciting area, because it's kind of, it's very much part of our culture now. And my fear is that there's some of it goes into an addictive component, and that's another shadow side of the feminine is addiction, of course.
Interesting.
I mean, not just that isn't, but I mean, any kind of addiction is a kind of an attempt to fill the kind of gap of mothering that was not adequate enough and fulfilling enough. So it leaves a huge gaping hole, and it goes into eating disorders and those kinds of things also.
And you're connecting that to you're bringing it back to the mother wound, to this not having affirmation, not being validated, not being supported.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I think it would be maybe also useful to talk about the shadow of the feminine in men and how that manifests.
Absolutely.
It's both, I mean, both men and women have been really badly wounded by patriarchy. It's not just women. And I think that's also something that is important, because women have been the ones that have, more consciousness has come to the way women have been wounded in patriarchy. But men have been bludgeoned. Their feeling side has been bludgeoned, and the wounding of that is tragic. And their fear is huge, but it's unconscious. So it's, it goes into the macho, power over, and the split in their sexuality is also a massive, massive wounding for them.
Oh, Sheila, you just cut off just these last 10 seconds or so. Can you repeat that?
I wanted to just say that I have great compassion for men on their journey of healing the feminine in themselves also, because they've got a long way, there's a long journey ahead for them also.
I completely agree. And you mentioned a few things, a few ways that the shadow manifests in men. What else are men experiencing under patriarchy? You said they've been bludgeoned by patriarchy.
I think their feeling side, has been disallowed. They've been deeply shamed with their feeling side from very young. big boys don't cry, and if you want a mummy, you're a sissy. And I mean, it's really, and boarding schools have been shocking places for men to have been really, really, their feeling side very badly damaged. So, that leaves them with their feminine side adolescent very often, nowhere near having brought to maturity. And so what begins to happen then is that their need for genuine warmth and nurturing that would have been a natural thing for any child to want has to be split off in their socializing. And then what happens with that dependency and need, it gets repressed. And in that repression and the split offness of it, it becomes sexualized. So need becomes sexualized. And the actual emotional experience of need is not, it's concretized into sexuality. And that's a very big problem, because the man can't access his feeling world, but he feels the neediness in his need for the sexual. Problems in relationships, because the woman begins to feel that this is, the mother-son kind of thing. He's coming to me for sex, because, and I don't feel like it or whatever. But it's the neediness that underpins that stays split off in the man. And, his attempt to try and engage with his feminine side, and the shadow of it is neediness and dependence. And they can't go there because it just feels shameful. It's a very hard journey for them to be able to feel that their masculinity is not compromised by them embracing their feeling side.
Oh, it is a long journey. And even as you're speaking, I can feel the ache and the pain there, and how it's just this really messed up situation where, as you said, men aren't allowed to feel. That's a very shameful thing. But then they're allowed to, like, sexual desire is totally okay. It's macho. That realm is okay. Craving sex, wanting women, being promiscuous, or having sexual conquest, that is a safe realm for them. So then these other needs that they really genuinely have but aren't able to express or open to or even recognize are then put all in this realm of sexuality, sex, desire. And then it's no wonder, I think, no wonder that there's this absolute obsession with sex. If that's the realm where they can feel and somehow reclaim this lost part of themselves, no wonder it's a huge source of addiction.
It's a minefield.
Yeah.
And I think that, as you say, it's condoned, or it's seen to be kind of prowess for the man. And if you think of the double standards, because if you look at the woman and you imagine that she has her own sexuality, and but if she lives out what men live out, she's a whore or a prostitute.
Yeah.
So that, the standards between sexuality between men and women, I mean, there's just a very exciting journey ahead, I think, around that. Because, if women express their need sexually, and it's not, and I'm not talking about neediness, I'm just expressing a mature human need for your own sexuality to have its expression. That can be a very frightening thing for a man.
Yes.
That's where his power lies. And if he can be the one to sort of, conquer or seduce the woman, but if the woman tries to seduce the man, the language that's used for that is very interesting. It's like she's the evil seductress, it's very hard for a woman to own her own seductiveness as not a terrible lure.
Yes. And I'm laughing because this very topic just hits so close to home, to be totally honest. This is the journey that I'm walking with my husband right now.
Oh, really? Yeah, I know so many younger people are. And I
Mm-hmm.
salute you for taking it on and trying to become more conscious of all of this, because it's so important.
It is. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting on the journey with my husband, it's been challenging. There have been challenges to reclaim an authentic sense of sexual identity and claim what I want. And it's been challenging for him, but I have so much compassion for both of us.
Both of you, absolutely.
And even when it's been messy or, uncomfortable or even painful, I think there can be this response of like, something is wrong. Something's wrong with him, something's wrong with me. When in fact, as you said, we're just creating the pathway. We're doing hard things. We're having hard conversations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really a new journey, and it is messy along the way. We haven't got stereotypes to follow, thank heaven. I mean, that's the exciting part, but it is challenging. It's very challenging.
Absolutely.
I just find myself feeling really excited for younger people who have got the opportunity early on enough with this new consciousness to really take it on.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to go back to what you said about the dangers of adopting a power over approach, the dangers of women disconnecting from the feminine and asserting this power over. What actually comes to mind is a lot of the discourse around men and sexuality. I think women are frustrated and they're upset with the how do I say, behaviors of men, with the catcalling, the responses that we're getting. I know, I'll just use myself as an example. On social media, it is important for me to express myself and talk about my sexuality, and that can be a post, that can be a video of me moving, and let's say that a man sees this, has no context for what I'm doing, and leaves a crude remark, which is something that happens. Now, I think the danger I can feel in myself is, well, I want to punish that man. Like, that's not okay. You're coming into my space. And that can be the reaction that comes up. So how do we walk this path while having compassion for these men who are making a lot of mistakes, who are causing harm, sometimes knowing that they're causing harm, sometimes not. But how do we walk this with them without adopting their techniques and
really like our parents? Well, that's a very, very, very poignant question, I think, Blair. Because you see, I'm not sure. You see, part of the danger for the feminine is compassion. Too much compassion. That's because the mother-daughter relationship is same-sex. The identification between mother and daughter is very much about moving towards. The feminine moves towards the mother. The masculine in the young man moves away from the mother. So the challenge for the feminine is to not necessarily always be moving towards. That's our go-to place. For the man, he moves away, and his challenge is to move towards. So compassion is one of those emotions that pulls us towards, sometimes inappropriately.
Mm-hmm.
So You know, I've done a paper and a workshop on the myth of Eros and Psyche, which is a very old myth, where the tasks that Psyche has to go through are given by the goddess Aphrodite. And it's a long myth, and it's the most wonderful. I've done it as a sort of a template for modern relationships and what needs to happen for the feminine in modern relationships. That's another, I won't go there. But what I wanted to say about your question is that in her Psyche's last task, she has to do it alone. She's got to go down to the underworld, and she is not allowed, put in the myth as she's not allowed to look back in pity. There are going to be people along the way begging for help, and the feminine always wants to go to the nurturing and that compassion, and she has to walk and not look back. Because the task for the feminine is a standpoint that doesn't pull you too far away. And my answer to you would be, you can't always have compassion when there is ill treatment, because the woman is objectified with those kinds of crude comments. Mm-hmm. You are an object of desire. You're not a woman and a human being with that kind of response. So the task is to put the woman down, say it's not okay.
Yeah.
And be able to stand your ground in some sort of way to give a comment that expresses what's not okay about it. I'm not an object. I'm not an object of desire. I'm a human. However it's worked. But the compassion, one can have it in a general sense, as I'm saying to you, I have. But if it comes to my own relationship, if I have, and I've had those experiences, if I have too much compassion, I'm lost. I'm back in that identification, and I've lost my sense of self, and then bad things happen to me.
Yeah.
It's really holding boundaries, but coming from the feeling place, not going to punish you place.
Yes.
It's very hard to find that road.
Wow, again, just such subtlety in that, coming from the feeling place rather than the punishing place. Yeah. Yes. And thank you for that. That was really illuminating, this compassion as the dangers of compassion and how that can...
Yeah. There's a difference between compassion and empathy, I think, also. I mean, I suppose they're different things, but there's a danger for the woman to go into an over-identification and what Jung would call a participation mystique, which is a fusion, a fused state. Compassion is a beautiful thing, but you've got to be separate enough to be able to be compassionate. And very often we're not separate enough. And then what would feel like compassion is just a drawing towards that overlooks everything.
Yeah.
Because you feel the compassion. And that's the trouble. That's what's happened in patriarchy. Women haven't had a sense of their own boundary, their own sense of strong enough sense of self. That's where the compassion becomes murky ground, because we haven't got a strong enough sense of self. So we move into letting go down a very important boundary in order to feel the compassion.
Yeah. Which is actually just slipping back into a very comfortable role of being valued for this nurturing, the mothering.
Exactly.
Yeah. What, in your opinion, is most important for a woman to walk that path of individuation and find her voice?
What's the most important? Well, I think the most important path is to do a sufficient enough journey of self-discovery oneself to deeply know one's own wounding, where my own sense of the child place in myself has been wounded, is terrified of abandonment, has been abandoned, and therefore that shapes and forms my way of relating in the world. because while I'm operating from that unconscious place, I'm going to be completely caught up in I'll do anything to please and placate and accommodate, because otherwise I'm going to be abandoned. So that for me is the real starting place, because when that part is not split off and becomes more conscious, then we can access our feeling world more, because it's not just men who are cut off from their feeling world. You know, women have also not been mothered adequately. So our feeling world is also an important checking point. How much in my own feelings am I actually? Because it's assumed women are more in their feelings than men, and that's, you know, often true because they've given more permission and their nature is more close to their feeling world. But women's, you know, because of our patriarchal paradigm, we are daughters of patriarchy, so we're also cut off. And that's a very destructive element in the woman, is her own cut-offness on a feeling level, and that gets her into a very negative masculine place. So we start with ourselves, humbly.
Yes.
It's a real journey for me to meet in myself large aspects of that part in me that was very difficult. And have to humbly walk
Yes. Yes. You cut off just a little bit, but I think you said humbly walk the path.
Yes.
Yeah. What's been the biggest support for you as you've walked your path?
I think my own therapeutic journey eventually, ultimately. I mean, I've done lots of different things in my life. I was in the church, and I was, kind of regimented in all kinds of Christian doctrines of what's good and what's bad and what's sinful and what isn't, and completely blocked off the wounded child in myself. I had to find my way out of that, but I did that by my own writing. I did my master's thesis on a topic that got me out of the church. I mean, and then I've written different papers on the mother-daughter relationship that helped me with my own experience with my mother. And Jungian psychology has been an enormous attribute to my own journey. It just fitted because it's got so many elements that other psychologies don't have. I mean, everyone's got its own strength and value, but because Jungian psychology addresses opposites, addresses spirituality and instinctuality, it just felt just such a useful container for me to do my own journeying. So, and my own therapeutic journey and my own analysis has been very painful but very worthwhile, and now I can walk with others. I think we take people as far as we've gone ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can take people as far as we've gone ourselves. Yeah. Sheila, thank you so very much for chatting with me today. This conversation was fascinating and illuminating, and I am also very grateful for you walking your path and being able to turn towards us and share your wisdom. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think I take an organic path of, and spontaneity, which I think is what I'd like. There's so many aspects that one feels there's so much to say about the topic, but for now I feel it's been a very lovely exchange between us, I feel.
Okay, well, everyone, how can people get a hold of you? Where can we find you?
Well, I'm on the South African Association of Jungian Analysts website. So that's the main point of contact for, where my contact details. I'm not on Facebook and these kind, the Instagram and those things. So unfortunately, that isn't a medium for me, but certainly via the Sarja website. And I think you also mentioned that you would like me to also kind of spread the word about your summit. I've asked our web committee, and they're happy for this to be, to be marketed and talked about. So if that is a help for you, I'd be really happy with that.
Yeah, the more people, the better.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, Sheila, thank you again so very much. It was really a pleasure. And for everybody watching, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for engaging in the conversation. I hope you got something out of this. And everyone, take care. Bye, Sheila.
Bye-bye.